Hello, good morning. Thank you for killing our lounge music there. Welcome back to day 2 of fear of missing out. Yeah, we are in fear of missing out. And welcome back to those of you who joined us yesterday. Thanks once again to our speakers from yesterday. We had some brilliant presentations, and of course to Hito Steyerl, who chaired. A couple of notices ahead of the day. Our first presentation will be from Women Inc., and then we'll quickly move straight into Alexei Radinsky's presentation. And then the following presentation, which will be at 2, with Eleanor Saiter and Tony Prescott, will be in the cinema space, so you just need to walk back along the concourse and into the cinema. And I also just wanted to flag up that later tonight at 8:15 in our cinema, Hito will be in conversation with Laura Poitras ahead of a screening of Citizen 4 and her short, The Programme. Now, we open today with Women Inc., which is a new working group of artists, writers, curators, founded by Karen Archey last year. This was in response to Hito's exhibition at Artist Space in New York. Their first project is the Lexicon, and the first iteration of this was at Artist Project Space. And now we have Karen Archey, writer and curator from New York. We're joined by Jamie Stearns, another New Yorker, curator and writer, and Linda Stupart, a London-based artist and writer. We have around 40 minutes for a presentation, and then we will be taking questions, so please do hold them for the end. But please join me in welcoming Women Inc. Thank you.
Thanks for coming on a Saturday morning. I know it's kind of difficult to get here with the parade and everything, and actually our 4th panelist, Zoe Whitley, had to cancel, unfortunately, because she couldn't get across the parade. So we're just gonna pull through now, and thank you again, ICA, for having us. This is our 2nd iteration of the Lexicon, so it's expanded. We're including some words from the first iteration and expanded to include about 10, 15 more with the help of some London-based members here. So, and you guys might have questions about Women Inc. and all of that, and so we'll go through that after the reading, which will be about 25 minutes.
Okay. Appropriation. When a male artist appropriates a woman's image for his own work. Usage. Have you seen Joyce Gunn and Nels Wolford project? No, I'm not a fan of appropriation.
Affirmative inaction. When a curator or critic repeatedly invokes the work of the same woman or person of color as their go-to token example, making it clear that they haven't bothered to become familiar with any others. Henry's affirmative inaction is getting on my nerves. He's always talking about his commitment to diverse exhibition programming, but he includes the same 2 black women in every show and acts like he deserves a prize for it.
Alpha fail. When a man in leadership position tries to make a bold move, but fails spectacularly. I almost felt sorry for Diet after his alpha fail at MoCA. They needed new leadership for sure, but that was definitely the wrong direction for the institution.
The Benetton Filter. When an art institution goes out of its way to photograph the few people of color at an event for use in marketing materials, aiming to create a sense that the audience is more diverse than it actually is. Get your game faces on. It looks like the event photographer is using the Benetton Filter and stalking all the POCs up in here.
Biesenbachl. A Klaus Biesenbach curated exhibition or media spectacle that elicits anger, embarrassment, and/or schadenfreude from the art world. Do you think you'll go to see the Bjork show at MoMA? That Biesenbachl? Nah, I don't think I have the patience to wait in line with tourists and sugar cube fanatics for 3 hours.
Bantuku. The moment when an underknown woman artist who has been active for decades finally achieves mainstream recognition in the art world. Have you seen Lynn Hirschman-Leeson's show at ZKM or Bridget Donahue? She really pulled Bantuku.
Booth bait. An attention-grabbing, ostentatious artwork used specifically to draw attention to a booth at an art fair. Remember Ivan Navarro's neon fence at Paul Kastman's Armory booth? The crowning booth bait of 2011.
Breaking Badu. Using philosophy to read mass culture as a means of breaking down the high-low divide while simultaneously reaffirming that divide. Zizek is really breaking Badu again with his Lacanian interpretation of David Lynch.
Bro-oriented ontology. A branch of ontology oriented around men's desires to completely disregard the lives of others, and particularly not men. You said, what is it? Hey, there's no women in our bro-o-o panel again. Man, talking about the gender, race, structural violence is human-oriented and thus irrelevant to bro-o-o.
Clown sourcing. When an established artist or celebrity uses crowdfunding for an expensive vanity project, even though they could easily fund the project through traditional channels. Zach Braff is the consummate clown sourcer. Last year, he raised $3.1 million for a new movie on Kickstarter.
Collaterator. Noun. A curator whose art historical research extends only as far as trawling work and contemporary art daily. More houseplants and stock images? I think I saw this show on CAD yesterday. Who's the collaterator again?
Deutsche Banking. When an American art institute hires a European male as director or chief curator, overlooking qualified women already on staff. Murray has been at the museum for almost a decade now, but unfortunately the board Deutsche Banked on Pierre. So true.
It was a little bit of a stretch there.
Devil Wears Prado. A high-ranking, powerful woman in the art world who is abusive or excessively critical of younger women employees as an interpolation of institutionalized sexism. She thought she'd landed her dream job as an assistant curator of paintings and sculpture until she realized she was working for a total Devil Wears Prado.
Ego gloves. Noun. A filter of caution through which one speaks to those with inflated egos. Hey, will you double check this email I just wrote to my boss? I tried to write it with ego gloves so I won't get fired.
Emotional. When one is indifferent or something to something IRL but feels compelled to respond in emoji. My mom just got her first smartphone and she's just been so emotional lately.
Well, this is like my whole life, but anyway. Noun. An email sent in a period of distress that the sender usually regrets the next morning. I got a nasty email from an artist whose show I negatively reviewed in Freeze this month, and he hasn't looked me in the eye since.
Fabject. Adjective or noun, fabjection. When a highly desirable artwork, usually by a cis straight male artist, employs discourses and imagery related to objection, but without ever having experienced what it means to actually be positioned as abject. Paul McCarthy's new sculptures at Hauser and Wirth are so fabject we must absolutely buy all of them at huge expense.
Fornicate. Verb. To write a takedown of an influential figure that is based solely on hearsay and gossip. Glenn Lowry was fornicated in the press, but he obviously kept his job since the only on-the-record source was the 3-year-old seen and heard.
That was a reference to Christian Viveros Fane from The Village Voice, who wrote a takedown of Klaus Biesenbach and only used seen and heard quotes.
Cool. Folkpinger, is that the right pronunciation? I don't know. Okay. Any Swedish people? Okay, anyway. Noun. The money art nonprofits allocate to wine and dine their donors, but somehow can't find money to pay their staff. From Swedish Fickpinger, pocket money. The reception after the panel was funded with ample Folkpinger. The unpaid production manager served fine Bordeaux.
Guggenheim. Noun. The practice of building Starchitect-designed trophy museums with underpaid immigrant labor. Both the new Guggenheim and New York University campuses in Abu Dhabi are United Arab Emirates royalty-funded Guggenheims.
Hegels, noun. Mentally exercising by reading a difficult text, such as Hegel's Phenomenology of Spirit, in a matter analogous to Kegel's. I'll be there soon. I just need a few minutes to finish my Hegel's. Sorry.
Hugo Bossing, Verb. When an institution makes an artist or guest curator agree to exhibition sponsorship that they find morally problematic. Even though I expressed discomfort at the idea of having my name attached to a Nazi uniform outfitter, the institute won't stop Hugo bossing me into having this after party.
Idea docking. Verb. When a man repeats a woman's idea back to her as though it's his own and everyone gives him credit for it. Stop idea docking me, Keith. I said that 3 minutes ago.
Imelda Marxist, noun. A Marxist public intellectual with a glamorous lifestyle. See also Champagne Socialist. After the precarious labor conference, Sophia and Charles went to dinner at Nobu and discussed wage slavery over black miso cod like a true Imelda Marxist.
I coyote. Noun. A person who operates under the illusion or delusion of being invisible to internet surveillance. Those coyotes think posting a notice about intellectual property to their Facebook walls will prevent the company from storing their data. Lol.
Maternity ward, the time when a woman has small children and zero time for extracurricular professional, social, or cultural engagement. Stephen, I'd love to go to the football game with you, but it's my first day off in 3 weeks and I'm still in maternity ward.
Menopause, adjective, the particular invisibility of women over 50. In Hito Steyerl's video, How to Not Be Seen, a fucking didactic educational .mov file, she introduces several ways to disappear. One is to be over 50 or menopause.
Moof diving. Verb. The superficial invocation of critical political theory to make an artist or critic work seem more serious and relevant. In the question and answer section of the panel last night, Jack Moof dived into some malarkey about forgetting Derrida, whatever that means.
No mammogram. Noun. The censorship of images of female bodies on social media platforms such as Instagram. Scout Willis started the influential Free the Nipple campaign after experiencing rampant no mammogram sentiments online.
Ouija board, noun, an art institution board whose composition and decision-making processes follow no discernible logic or reason, guided mainly by nepotism, sponsorship liabilities, quotas, and other forms of partiality. We'd love your application, but our Ouija board might give the slot to one of their nephews or a friend's collection. I've given up trying to predict their selections.
Perverse racism. The mentality that leads white males to believe that people of color and/or women have better chances for grants, prizes, exhibitions, gallery representation, and other opportunities due to pity votes and political correctness, or reverse racism, rather than candidates' talent and experience. Bill's perverse racism led him to believe he lost the job to Shari because she's a more sympathetic candidate as a black woman.
Quantum misogyny. Noun. Attempting to secure absolute male, mostly white supremacy in the art world by way of dubious art historical argument. Johnson's review was wholly reliant on quantum misogyny, arguing that women artists aren't more famous because they haven't worked hard enough to speak to universal human conditions like white men have.
Reverse politicking, verb, when liberal arguments are used to promote conservative ideas. The appropriation artist Bob Smith reverse politicked his way into the media's hearts by crying censorship when a gallery refused to show his paintings that debased women.
Scapegoat, noun. An extremely harsh art review that superficially engages with the work of an artist in order to construct some broader argument about the state of contemporary art, court controversy, or allow the critic to show off their rhetorical gymnastics. She started doubting her career after John panned her first solo show, but the review was nothing more than a lazy scapegoat.
Soul searching. Verb. When international curators scour the globe for so-called emerging art scenes to quote-unquote discover. Hans heard that Asia is the next big thing, so he's soul-searching in Mumbai for his next upcoming group show.
Single white female, noun. When galleries or institutions add a token female artist to an otherwise all-male exhibition in order to avoid criticism. I was so excited to be in the show until I realized my work had nothing to do with the others. They pulled a single white female on me.
Socket litter, noun. A device that has been rendered effectively useless because of planned obsolescence, even though it works just fine. My iPhone 4 was perfectly capable of sending emails and text, but the latest iOS release turned it into socket litter.
Transpropriation, noun. An artist whose gender identification becomes their defining attribute in exhibition statements or press. I was excited to be in that biennial, but every time I'm mentioned as a trans artist.
Tote bag, noun. A tote bag from a far-flung biennial or art fair that indicates they wear a status as an important art world traveler. After returning from the Sharjah biennial, Christine promptly displayed her tote bag everywhere she went, hoping someone would ask her about her trip.
Unserpentined.
You serpentined.
Oh, you serpentined. Oh, that makes more sense. You serpentined. It's like, oh. When a well-known curator usurps the efforts of artists, and they only become known for working with that curator. Amy is doing another panel with Jorg. I'm worried she's getting you serpentined.
Vaginostic, noun. An educated person who is sympathetic to feminism, but unsure if there is still a need for it, such as millennial MFA students. Kim's little sister went into a women's studies class of vaginostic and emerged a card-carrying bra burner.
The We Are the World treatment. Noun. When a famous artist is commissioned to make a site-specific work in a place and/or with a community with which they have no particular connection. Bonus points if their work is about social. I would like to go to the exhibition with you, but the commissioned Thomas Struth rip-off photos of Akron are such a We Are the World treatment.
Xenophobia. The fear of strong women, such as Xena the warrior princess. You could tell by the way the gallery visitor talked about Kara Walker's anger that he was xenophobic.
Euloging, verb. To unapologetically chronicle, highlight, or celebrate bad and immature decisions publicly, especially online, in order to curry favor or gain followers. Jerry Salt's making a scene about his right to free speech after getting banned from Facebook for posting misogynistic pictures is the saddest display of euloging I've seen in some time.
Zubladorich, adjective. A person or institution accepting funding from a deeply problematic sources in order to meet operation expenses. The Museum of Contemporary Art fixed their fiscal crisis by casting aside ethics and becoming Zubladorich.
And that's it. So I was thinking we could take the rest of the time to do some Q&A and maybe, talk about feminism. I'm going to see if we can just play this as a slideshow in the background.
Or maybe additions. Maybe someone wants to add some terms.
Does anyone have any words to add?
Yes, there's a question by Stephen.
Hi, I wanted to ask what your plan is with the lexicon and how long you plan to extend it for, and if there's any way you can kind of describe the decision you would take to stop making it.
Do you want us to? I don't know. I mean, it's really an open-ended project. So basically, we would like to be able to do it in different cities and kind of, have it be as visible as possible, and also kind of make it location-specific. And I mean, it's actually a lot of work to make these words. It probably, we just read through it quite quickly and everything, but it takes such an incredible amount of time to just make a really good pun about art and feminism. But no, I think that we would like to keep doing it and then eventually maybe publish it and put an end to it, but not for a while. I kind of think that we could look at this as like a small book tour or something. And also, it really kind of, like working in an alternative format like this, for me is really interesting because I write criticism and occasionally curate exhibitions, and I feel like I usually work in very traditional formats, and this is something that actually really gets people's attention in a different way. It opens up discourse. So we're not really in a rush to put an end to it. We're really kind of more interested in diversifying the amount of, or like what we can cover, and being more inclusive, like even more inclusive of different people in the group.
Also, it's quite a like the Google Doc is quite amazing of the words, but it's quite a big process of people kind of commenting or changing things or adding things or like adding their own experiences or like deciding who to name. Like all these kind of things get kind of picked up by all the different people who are working on it. So it's quite it's a really good process, but it has a lot of, yeah, that was the word.
It's collective, it's slow.
First of all, thank you. I really enjoyed it. I really hope that you could also find a word that describes, which something that I come across a lot, that people keep thinking that I'm someone from PR just because I like to do my hair, and they just don't realize that I can be a critical thinker as well. So I hope that that's something that you might add as well. But I was just wondering, in terms of the process, you said it was a Google Doc. When did it start? Why did it start? Was there a certain event that took place that you find it really urgent to start it? I was just wondering if you could elaborate on that.
I was invited by Hito Steyerl to do an event at Artist Space and to speak in conversation with someone. And so there wasn't really a go-to feminist group that was made to create public responses to feminist issues. So I kind of was like, okay, well, this needs to happen. And the easiest way for us to kind of collaborate, because we're all in different cities, was really to work through Google Docs. And that really just kind of, evolved, and we kept troubleshooting about what kind of form that would take. And the first version of the lexicon was pulled together in a pretty short amount of time. So we're really lucky to just be able to keep expanding it and kind of honing it in. But I felt like also I'd been seeing a lot of really kind of, like a lot of rampant misogyny in the art world in New York. And, there's recently an exhibition titled Ho that I found both like misogynistic and racist at the same time. But there was no way to address that as a unified voice. And so I could write a review about it as a critic, but like my other like hundreds of pissed off colleagues and friends like couldn't really do anything but just say that to each other. And I kind of felt like, why wouldn't we have this kind of forum where we can make a public response? And there had been other instances in the press, for example, with Ken Johnson's, he wrote a couple reviews that were also very problematic, and the only thing you can really do is write a letter to the editor and hope it gets published. And so one of the projects that we would like to do with Women Inc. is to be able to write public responses to issues. And we haven't started doing this yet because the group is still very much in formation. But the idea of incorporation is actually something that we were inspired by Liquidity Inc., Hito's recent video. And interestingly, the etymology of incorporate is to become a group of people, to become a unified body. And I found that to be a really kind of interesting and actually kind of surprising etymology, because it also, describes corporations. And to incorporate a corporation means that these people actually are no longer responsible for certain things like depriving their employees of basic medical care because it can be their religious right, because they are one body, and that body has religious beliefs. So this was kind of a lampooning, too, of corporate culture. If you notice, we use a lot of corporate aesthetics. And we thought that the Inc. in Women Inc. could mean two things. It could respond to the fact that we live in a highly corporatized society, and also that we would like to kind of come together as a body in a, not necessarily unified, but a voice that represents a heterogeneous membership.
Well, thanks very much. That was a great project in a way. And I quite like the fact that you are reappropriating this incorporation aspect of incorporation culture. But do you have any plan in future to make it open to the public in a way? Because this format of dictionary is something that can be probably one format of opening it to the public. And I'm thinking about one example, which is by Viz magazine, if you know that. It's sometimes very misogynistic and racist in the examples of their Das Kapital. But the fact that it's open to the public, probably you can also reappropriate that sort of format as well.
We actually have a word in formation, but we are working on the definition, and it's dysentery. But yes, it's really bad. But yeah, I mean, I think that we would like to make the kind of structure available to the public, but it's actually really a precious group of people in a way. Like, the kind of capacity is very precious because it's about 30 people right now, and like we have about maybe 10 people that are really, really active in the group that, look at this document every day and like really actively think about new words. But it's just really hard when it gets bigger and bigger and bigger. So that's one of our goals, is to become a little bit bigger, but right now there's really kind of a capacity limit in terms of what we can all do, especially because the core members, which are myself, Jamila James, who is a curator at the Hammer and very busy, Anne Hirsch, who is an artist and also has a full-time job, and then Rachel Wetzler, who's writing her dissertation and doing all sorts of freelance work. So we're all kind of these precarious freelance laborers, except for Jamila, really, and she's incredibly busy as well. So we're kind of just taking it as we can, and hopefully can also inspire other people that want to write dictionaries of their own.
Yes?
I found some of these words really funny. Is it important to you that they're amusing?
Was it intentionally funny, do you mean?
Yeah.
Yeah. I think that it just kind of happened. Like, we didn't set out to be like, we want to be funny, but it was a really fun process. Yeah.
I think it's just like an absurd thing to like think about, like when you're thinking of like how messed up the gender, just like how things are structured in the art world, especially if you're coming from like a feminist perspective. It is just so ridiculous. It's almost like you laugh or you cry, and you'd rather laugh, because it's like, because you have to cry most of the time in real life. So yeah, so I think it's just kind of I was like, well, I'm not even humorous, and these are just, they're kind of like puns, and like they're puns, they're zingers, they're kind of like these things, and I think that, just kind of, I didn't mean it to be, I don't think anyone's meant it to be, but they all read like that, not all of them, but most of them do.
I was trying really hard to be funny, and it was really hard. Because like people always think I'm really funny and entertaining when I don't mean to be, but then I was like, I have to be really funny. It was difficult. But I think, there's a bigger question there, obviously, about like humor and kind of anger and how those work together in terms of dissent. And like, I'm just thinking of things that are happening in London recently, where like people, especially like minorities, are being like really, really kind of lambasted by the right-wing press when they use like certain kinds of humor, when they kind of like speak in a way that isn't like 100% serious, and like that seriousness is obviously also like gendered, linked to like all kinds of other things. So I think it's quite a like important political tool as well, as kind of,
And also you come up with a word about the kind of gender dynamic between Carl Andre and Ana Mendieta that I thought was really important, but we kind of struggled to find an appropriate kind of verbiage for it.
Yeah, that was, because I think one of the ways of doing it is you kind of think about things that make you really angry, or events that make you really, this is how I did it, and then try and think of like a word for it. And the one thing that we really wanted to address, and like hopefully we'll kind of enter into, was, basically Carl Andre having murdered Ana Mendieta, which I think is really important to say really often, as much as possible, especially because he's still shown all the time, everywhere, like in every major collection, and kind of thinking about a way to talk about that in this, but also realize that that is part of a kind of bigger institutional problem. And I think that's also part of the thing with the words, is like when they do refer to specific events and people, the way that they become a dictionary is also a way to refer to that being kind of linked to systemic violence, or kind of, so the fact that like the whole art world rushed to defend Carl Andre, he's this like minimalist sculptor, that, all the things that happened with that, the reason that he's still shown that like, I should stop talking about this soon, but like when Ana Mendieta had her big retrospective recently here, her first one, it was nothing about that was mentioned. It was kind of had her whole life, but nothing about how she died. Like, that's not just because of the two of them, it's because of kind of sexism and how that relates to media and all these things. So yeah, so that's kind of maybe part of it.
Hi, actually I just wanted to add to that about Ana Mendieta, which was that when that exhibition came out, the family were actually really frustrated because it was all about her death, and all of the articles that were written were actually sort of mainly focused on her death rather than her life and her artwork. Just wanted to add that in.
But not about how, like there was no hint in the exhibition. There was a bit in the main catalogue at the end that hinted, and there were collaborations between the two of them on shows, so it was very like,
There was another question in the front row.
I have a question about the relationship between feminism, perhaps, and the idea of FOMO. Do you think that media technology reshaped all imaginary vocabulary of feminism and gender, and that raised new issues like Nipplegate on Instagram, and so that was my first question. Do you think that it's about that media technology and smartphone technology shaped all imaginary vocabulary, or do you think that the uprise of smartphones and being connected 24/7, maybe for women, I can only speak about my own position, raised a new awareness of our own positions itself. So it's more like a self-anxiety that brings up these questions again because we are 24/7 connected, or do you think that media technology really reshaped our imaginary vocabulary? Maybe for Karen, sorry.
So you're asking, sorry, it was a little hard to understand you. So you're asking basically if like a kind of like increased connectedness breeds FOMO?
It's like a self-anxiety that is raised now because of this 24/7 connectivity, so it's more personal angst, I say. Or is it really like that media technology fundamentally reshaped ideas and images to be? So maybe it was already going on since, I don't know, ages.
I don't know. I mean, I think things have certainly gotten better for women since, you know, pre-internet times, but I don't know. I guess it's hard to say. I don't think I really see a connection between image culture and like the state of feminism. I mean, obviously image culture has like very specific connections between how we view and project images of women. But I don't know, I guess.
But I think it's a really interesting question, if I may just add. You know, when I was walking here this morning, I was still thinking about yesterday's panel, and I was asking myself, okay, what's the relation between technology and feminism? So I came up with the idea that, you know, inventing the washing machine really, really, really helped, you know, gender issues. I mean, that was fantastic. But how about digital technology? I mean, the results are much more mixed about that, no? So I don't have any answer to that. That's a new question that arose for me yesterday. What's the impact of digital technology on gender equality, maybe? So it's a completely open question. What are your views on that?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's just like, there's pros and cons, of course, but I think that there's a really amazing pro to technology with image making and how women are, you know, and the feminist dialogue is kind of this mutability. I think that it's just making, you know, giving more avenues and ability to have a mutable self-identity, to have a mutable projection, to have ambiguity, and with that comes anonymity, which can be really awful in some, you know, online platforms or ways. But I think this kind of way of kind of invention, reinvention, kind of restructuring, and having control. I think that in a weird way, like technology and the internet gives people in general a little bit more control of certain things, especially of how they project themselves outwardly, like through gender and images. And I think that's like super empowering and just, I don't know, I think it's really exciting, and it's changing aesthetics. You know, it's just changing our understanding of the aesthetic experience, female bodies, male bodies, that whole, you know, feminism affects feminism completely.
I mean, yeah, I think that like what's interesting about the washing machine is the link between women's work and the relationship to, like, say, the internet and the production of images in women's work, so that we know that like a lot more women, whatever that means, use Instagram, for example. And like I was talking to Jessie Darling about this, and we had a long conversation about like why it is that, for example, like artists who aren't men, their internet production, so say like your Tumblr or your Instagram or whatever, is assumed to be part of your artwork in a way that that's not the case with men. So like men have like their Instagrams where they're like pictures of like their food or whatever, but then they have artwork and that is separate, and that was quite, I didn't resolve it, but I thought it was a really interesting conversation to have about those relationships. I mean, I think also, like if we were asked the question in the 90s about like the internet and image culture and like women and and like genderqueer people, and kind of, it was the most exciting thing, because it was like everyone was sitting on chat rooms being people who they weren't, or they might be, or, you know, like, well, I was, I don't know. So, you know, there was this sense that you could escape your corporeal identity and that soon that wouldn't matter anymore, and that kind of, but that didn't happen. you know, and I think that it's really important to say, like, that hasn't happened, and that, you know, stock imagery is a good example, how actually image culture on the internet has reproduced a lot of normativity, a lot of kind of things that were already there, and things like Facebook making you use your real name, I mean, such a violent thing. So it's kind of gone in this opposite direction, proving who you are. And obviously, like, then there's the whole link, of course, to, like, big data and whatever. But I just think it's a different question, and it's quite interesting to look at what we thought would happen and what kind of maybe hasn't.
Well, last night I was talking to Olia Leolina, and we were talking a lot about what could constitute a net language or a net voice. And I'm increasingly really interested in this because I think that there's kind of an internet-specific affectation, or a kind of, I guess today net language would be considered something that's inherently negative right now. It's going to be something, you know, like Nicholas Carr, The Shallows, like, you know, our minds are so fractured and we have kind of no attention span and so on and so forth, or I'm divulging too much. And I think that it's interesting to look at two different kinds of affectations. One is, and this is the problematic word, a hysterical voice, a hysterical confessional voice online, and what that means. And I think that it is something that you increasingly see with kind of, you know, straight talking artists and curators and writers that that have some sort of confessional quality to them in order to, first of all, be heard, but second of all, also to kind of build a kind of intimacy between the receiving party who's reading their Twitter feed. And I think that that's something that's actually very internet specific, to kind of build this identity and build this kind of intimate confessional identity that actually manipulates the structure of interacting online or through a network. Was there another question?
I've just got another question that kind of came to me just as we were speaking there, but I think there's a general consensus that language, text-based language is being reduced, particularly in things like social media. And I suppose this is an example. I wondered if you could talk a little bit about the relationship between text and image, and whether you can see image becoming more relevant or prevalent than text in the written language.
I think we're living in such a small scale of time. Like, we're just little blips in our communication right now. And I feel like, you know, back in the, you know, there used to be hieroglyphs and there used to be more image. Like most Asian languages are based on images, you know. So it just happens to be that we're just a Western-dominated culture where language is this linear kind of like structured form, and I think it's mutable and it's changing, and it's going to always change. And I don't know, I think it's an interesting and important conversation, but I also think it's just kind of like, yeah, we're gonna, it's just like a part of the bigger thing, you know? I don't know.
I mean, it reminds me also of Annika Yee's work, who is really interested in the sense of smell, and also she's thinking a lot about the dominance of text and sight and how that could be kind of reimagined in an artistic context. But yeah, I agree that like we're in increasingly an image-based society over text, but I don't really have a lot to say about that, honestly.
Yeah, I mean, I also don't think language online is reduced. I think that it's a bit complicated, isn't it? Because you use like shorter words so that you can say more in a false economy of something like Twitter. So I think that the relationship between that is much more complicated and more interesting. You know, it's like the reason that you use shorter words so you can say more, so because you want to write faster or something. I don't know, I feel like there's something about that is quite important. Or as a particular kind of affect to really annoy theory bros, that's like the main reason that I started using that kind of language is literally just to be antagonistic, and I think that's also quite useful.
When I was thinking, when Karen asked me to do this, I was really thinking about this idea of language and construction, and maybe a little bit off of what you're asking, but this idea of how language and kind of a dictionary is really about authority. Like, it's really like this authorized structure, like some guy named this thing, or you probably a man, like named this thing, and we've kind of used it as like a hierarchy of structure, and there's this kind of authorizing mechanism of it. And I think that's what this Lexicon project is really kind of, it's good and it's also challenging because we are kind of like reappropriating those kind of authorized, like we're making up new language, making up new words, and kind of restructuring that like authorizing thing. So I think that there's kind of that flexibility of kind of taking a word and saying, I'm gonna make up my own word, is kind of in a weird way, like, I'm gonna make up 5 letters are gonna mean an emotion, or you know what I'm saying, I'm gonna talk to my parents through this whatever, stuff. It's still it's interesting to see what that's doing to the kind of structure of that.
It's maybe less about language being reduced than about language being condensed and compressed, but also acquiring a certain ambivalence, which is more like an image, basically. So it becomes, the meaning start to become ambivalent and ambiguous. So that's kind of interesting, that language becomes more like an image somehow. It's also interesting that, a project which is so intrinsically connected and basically unthinkable without technology ends up focusing on basically the oldest new technology there is, namely language. I find that also very interesting. Are there more comments? Maybe additions to the lexicon? Yes, there is a question over there.
Thanks. Just to continue actually the idea of the text and image, I think it's quite interesting for me the idea of form as well, and the way you structured this presentation. In a way, you talked about authority and being a dictionary, but I think your presentation is interesting because it also incorporates the idea of corporate language, and it looks like a PowerPoint presentation. It probably is. So anyway, I think that's quite interesting the way you're presenting things, but I was hoping you might talk a little bit about what sort of impact you want this presentation work body to have. Do you want the Deutsche Bankers of the art world to look at this and kind of think a little bit, or where do you see this going to the wider world beyond the kind of, the ICAs and the sort of smaller, art spaces?
Well, first of all, the corporate aesthetics were very intentional. Like, we included this, I don't know if you can see it on the screen, but there's like a slight gradient, and it's Arial font, and that was very intentional. And we're also using stock images for most of the kind of supplementary images and stuff like that. And that was, again, to kind of play on this idea of incorporation and commenting on corporate culture. But as far as the actual effect that this could have, I look at it as being about consciousness raising. And you can always say, like, oh, wow, I'm that person. Like, maybe I should think about that. And hopefully this won't stay in this room, but like, we're working on expanding this and maybe publishing it somehow, and also having people talk about it, and kind of to hone in ideas within ourselves about, like, maybe I'm doing something problematic, or maybe this is something that now that I have a concept for this, that I can talk about it with another person. Also, I think that I would like to encourage people to kind of experiment with different forms, with different project forms, and build their own groups, and so on and so forth.
Yeah, I mean, the term of incorporation was always so fascinating because it exactly means both, right? Becoming a corporation and unbecoming, no? It's like decorporate at the same time. So it's a very interesting contradiction, becoming a body but not becoming a body at the same time. At least it seems to mean that to me. Is that correct? Okay, maybe a last comment or question from the audience?
I was expecting some tough questions from Londoners.
So it's your last chance, Londoners. Yeah, there is
Okay, here we go.
Yeah.
London is tough. London is tough.
I don't know if it's going to be a tough question because I just sort of slipped in at the end. But one of the things that occurred to me, just from seeing a few seconds of your responses to questions, is this idea of exclusivity. So by you creating a language, of course, you're excluding those who don't understand the language. So I wondered, in some ways, like how are you going to govern who is allowed to have access to this language and also who is able to broaden this language? I suppose I'm thinking about that in relation to trolls on 4chan, because that's a unique community with its own lexicon, its own language, and that's sort of filtered out into the mainstream. So we use memes and image macros because they were birthed on Bboard. So I'm just wondering, how are you going to control membership of the people who are allowed to use this exclusive language? And then how do you envisage it trickling out into the mainstream, if that's possible? I mean, or is this just a futile exercise that is useful for you to get together and think about things that have been bothering yourselves, but ultimately will not be useful at all?
What's the opposite of troll, so to speak? I mean, that would be a very interesting addition to the lexicon. Untrolling. What kind of word could there be for that, right?
I guess the idea is that what's the point in language? Because if language just leads you towards more reflection and no action. And it seems like what we have a lot of at the moment today is reflection on the internet.
But this is really interesting, if I may just add something, because, I keep thinking back of... Sorry, what? Anyhow, I keep thinking back of that book, that inspired basically all these ideas for me about incorporation, which is Derrida's book, which is called Limited Ink. And this is precisely about the idea of language as an action, right? Language being able to do things and to undo things. So I would be skeptical about the idea that language is just this kind of platonic, ideal notions that are not doing anything. I think language is action.
Yeah, of course. I mean, I wouldn't say that either. But I'm just saying what this language is enabling at the moment is us to reflect on the language. So I'm just wondering what action will come from having a new lexicon for some sort of repressive strategies that are happening in the art world, as opposed to just combating them. In a way, I suppose it's about my own anxiety.
Could you just sum up what your comment is in one brief sentence? Because I'm kind of getting lost.
Well, just pick one of the assertions I made earlier and answer that.
Okay, I mean, I have a generous and a less generous response. I mean, I think that the less generous one is we definitely had a word for men in the audience at feminist events who won't give up the microphone and keep talking, but apparently we didn't include it.
Let's be nice. Let's play nice.
The more generous response was that I think it is actually quite a good question, and I think that it is site-specific in that it is at an art institution. It's a set of words that deal and I think site specificity is really important. I think that real institutional critique is important. So whether or not these words will be meaningful to people who operate entirely outside of the art world, probably not a lot of them. I think that maybe the practice of making new words, the practice of doing that is useful, and hopefully that comes about. So I
think that's kind of the transmutable, whatever. You can't. This is specific. If it's not we're humans. This is time. We only have a little bit of it. But I think this kind of model, this structure where it's you can collectivize with other people and create your own language, whatever, you know what I'm saying? You can, whatever it is that you're finding oppressive and or pissed off about or whatever, or want to comment on, you can do this, you can enable this for yourself. It's obviously it's complicated in a lot of ways, but it's, something that you and 5 mates can do, for whatever thing you want.
Yeah, so basically your question is how is this worth anything if it's not going to travel outside of the art world, essentially?
Yeah.
I guess what I would say to that is that we're just starting, you know, like this is something that's very much in formation, and also I don't think that like the weight of the world should be on our shoulders. You know, this is something that isn't just our problem, and I think that a lot of these words could be taken out of the art world and are generally about, you know, like nonprofit funding and gender dynamics and other things, but you may have not been here for 90% of the presentation, and it may have been more kind of apparent to you had you seen the presentation, but basically, I think that this project is about consciousness raising, and I think that that is something that's really valuable, and I think that we can have a big impact on a small scale and not necessarily have to kind of, you know, fix the whole world at once. And frankly, I don't have the resources or capacity to do that. I wish I did. But, you know, I think that it's really okay to like kind of focus on one thing and then see how it goes and go from there. And this is also like why we kind of have mental capacity, like group capacity. This is so that we can actually make this happen on a small scale. But yeah, it is a small scale, and we're okay with that.
I mean, maybe this will. Okay. Last question here in the center, and this will be the last question. I'll comment.
No, it's maybe just to ask a question about this question, which is, and you now saying on this small scale and the idea of exclusivity, and just one thing maybe that hasn't been pointed out, and I might be taken for granted, is that a lot of the things being said are not things that people would normally feel comfortable in a professional setting having said. So my impressions of this presentation are, and in these early stages, which I appreciate you saying it is the early stages, is that this is the only way to foster that kind of, the beginnings of the development of a language, where people feel okay to say those things and to define them for themselves, and then to actually have representatives sitting in front of an audience saying what that is, as opposed to like freeze Instagram or a more anonymous kind of like lambasting or criticizing things.
Yeah, it's also a sentiment I very much share, that the language most of us, I certainly use, you know, for trying to say anything is mostly a language of the 20th century, if not earlier. And that basically the language of the 21st century remains to be invented, right? And I really feel the need for terms that are able to condense the present, as it were, right? It doesn't exist yet. Yeah, which may be something also addressed in some of tomorrow's presentations. For now, thanks a lot. Karen, Zoe, Linda, thank you so much.